Okay,
vertical.
perfect.
So, and so what you've done, you've set a minute ventilation, a percentage of the normal minute ventilation, and the ventilator decides tidal volume and respiratory rate based on resistance or compliance. So for example, if you have an asthmatic patient, they have a hard time getting air out, they have to have lower rates and higher tidal volumes so that they don't so they don't auto peak, which is what there's not enough time for the air to come out and they start building up pressure in their lungs, so on.
So does ASB just make those changes for you? Or?
It does.
Okay.
So based on your pulmonary mechanics. So another example, if your patient has low compliance, like if they're developing ARDS or something like that, acute respiratory distress syndrome, what you'll see is it's going to select lower tidal volumes and higher rates because like in the hospital setting, when we have those type of patients, we're always using rates that are 25, 30, and low tidal volumes prevent increased pressure in the lung and causing ventilator associated lung injury. So that's adaptive support ventilation. It's pretty simple. Like I said, I mean, in your cases, we're going to want to ventilate our patient normally at 100% of the normal minute ventilation. You just set 100%, and it's going to pick a tidal volume and respiratory rate based on their pulmonary mechanics. So that's one of the modes on this. And the other modes you're going to have are going to be the same modes that you're used to seeing. So you have pressure control, where you're going to set up pressure, right? And that pressure is going to determine what the tidal volume is going to be. And then you have volume control modes where you just set a volume and the pressure is going to be variable. Okay. So I turned the vent on. Power button's up here in the upper right-hand corner. So all I did was press the button, turns the vent on. There's about a 1 minute startup time where it's going to do its own little self-check. What you're going to get with the ventilator is a circuit, a coaxial circuit. This is actually a dual limb circuit, but it's just your breathing circuit. And included with that circuit is also going to be what's called a proximal flow sensor. So this is close to the patient. This is where all your monitoring is going to happen from. All the changes are going to happen from. All happens from here. So very accurate. It's where you get your waveforms, your monitored values are going to come from this flow sensor. I believe the circuits you'll be getting will be coming with an expiratory valve also. So the whole thing's going to be disposable. Okay. So this is a reusable expiratory valve. Had to go, like in a hospital setting, we take it to sterile processing and they clean it. But most likely you're getting disposable expiratory valves, which are clear. So these are single patient use, okay? Single patient use expiratory valve, along with the single patient use flow sensor and circuit, okay? So obviously we're gonna use this. One of the first things we have to do is hook a circuit up. Okay, so expiratory valve, there's a spot for the expiratory valve. It only could fit in one way, and that's down here on the bottom in the expiratory housing. Okay, so just be aware there is a little plastic cap on here. If I take that cap off, that cap is to hold this little rubber gasket on. Okay, it doesn't fall off that when they're new, they don't fall off that easily. So just be aware if you have a huge leak or something. So we're going to do a pre-op check. We're actually going to check to make sure the circuit is airtight. If you have a large leak, first place to check is make sure that gasket is there. Okay. To put it into the expiratory housing, you have an exhaust port that's on the bottom. Point it down towards the ground. Put it into the expiratory housing and twist to the right. You'll feel it click into place. If it's not wobbling and you can't pull it out, it's in. Next piece is your circuit. Circuit, it does matter which side, which way this goes on. So inspiratory is on the top, expiratory is on the bottom. You want to put this circuit on so that when you put it into place here, the circuit is going towards the front of the vent and not backwards going towards the back of the vent. If you forget that, if you take an elbow off, start taking the elbows off once, one of them will say inspiratory on it. And inspiratory is on top, so this one will go on top. Just hook them in, both elbows into both connectors. And the last piece to hook up, you got a flow sensor. It's also color-coded. You have a white connector and a blue connector. Clear goes to white, blue goes to blue. After that's set up, this is your circuit set up. Obviously, this is ready to go to a patient. I'm not sure what you guys use, if you use suction catheters or anything in between, or you just generally hook suction catheter.
Both ways.
Both ways. So can go directly to the ET tube or to the suction catheter. What about HMEs for humidification? You guys use those too? No, you just go with dry gas? Okay, great. if you ever did use an HME would go on the flow sensor to provide humidification. Okay. Any questions on your circuit? Okay. So before we do the pre-op check, we can go over what else is on the ventilator.
Is there an elbow on the end of that?
On the end of this?
Just go straight
No.
Or does it have to go straight onto the tube like this?
It would go, so usually the suction catheter, you'd have a corrugated tubing and then it would go to the tube. Otherwise, if you're not using a suction catheter, then you would go directly to the
Do
tube.
they make an elbow for it?
There's all kinds of adapters you can get. Obviously, medical companies make all kinds of adapters. Easier just to use a suction catheter, to be honest. But if you were, you'd have to look for an elbow if you want a specific elbow that would fit this. It's general 22. The connectors are 22 millimeter connectors. So.
Hopefully you all know we have those in the ambulance, the Ballard section.
Right.
Yes.
It's just easier to hook to a Ballard, then you can suction your patient anyways. So I would just hook it to a Ballard. And again, when you have the Ballard, you have corrugated tubing and then to the patient, so it's like an elbow. On the back, one thing to be aware of, there is a little filter here. I'm just going to grab the filter, pull it out. It's kind of like a pre-filter filter. So there's a huge HEPA filter back here that filters everything. This is just trying to keep any large particles from getting in there and shortening the life of the HEPA filter. You have extra filters that came with the ventilators, and obviously when you run out, you can get more. They're just this white filter. There is another filter here, the black one. I'll show you that next. To put this into place, it just slides into the slot, like so, and seats. On this side of the vent, you have another filter. This just filters the air going to cool the internals. So I just grabbed the middle, pulled it out. To put it in, you just kind of line it up. And then line it up, push the sides in. And exactly, there you go. Okay. Oops. AC power cord is also alternating. AC power cord is also here. Okay. Direct current if you want to go direct current. On this side, you also have the connector for your oxygen hose. Uses high pressure oxygen, so obviously you're gonna have that on the ambulance. Usually they leave the hoses hooked on, but if it's not on, it just screws on right here, and then to your ambulance, whatever ambulance connectors you have. I don't know if are they screw in? Quick connect. So you'll get a quick connect for this, which will screw onto the quick connect, and you can just plug it into oxygen. Okay.
Can that wrap around the handle at all to keep it?
This can go where, yep, it can go where you can do whatever you want with it. Some people will use this hanger and hang it off the back.
Perfect.
Like that. If you're bringing this on a gurney, for example, this is a rail hanger. So if you're going to hang it on the rail, it is the best idea to wrap this around it, and so that if it gets knocked off, it doesn't fall all the way to the ground. Okay. Cord, wrapping the cord, you can wrap it around this. Okay, your AC cord. Any questions so far? Pretty straightforward. All right, so we put a new circuit on. We do have to do a circuit test and compliance check. So what this is it's actually going to calibrate this circuit and flow sensor, or this flow sensor to this specific circuit. Okay. To run the pre-op check on your main screen, you have something that says pre-op check right here on the bottom left. If I hit pre-op check, let me turn the brightness up for you guys, actually. So you obviously know this is battery powered. On 80% screen brightness, it's going to last, the batteries together last 9 hours. Okay, so 4.5 hours each. You do have a swappable battery just in case one of you are running out of juice. You can always swap one of the batteries for another battery. So you see, take it out, put the new battery in. Okay. These vents, they come with one battery charger. I'm assuming you can also charge them in the vent, so you just leave them in the vent, plug the vent in, charge the batteries. Okay. So pre-op check, back to pre-op check. pre-op check is again on the bottom left. It says pre-op check, hit it. There are 3 different checks here. You only need to do 2 of them. One is the tightness test. That's the one I like to do first. All you have to do is hit it. So one thing you have to, one thing you have to do is follow the directions under the gray bar, okay? So it's telling me disconnect patient because I have my cap on. The cap, it doesn't know if this is a patient or a cap. It sends a biased flow. It doesn't know what's stopping the flow. It doesn't know if it's a cap or if it's a patient. So it's going to continue to say disconnect. Eventually it fails, but it's going to continue to say disconnect patient until you take the cap off, okay? And then it's going to say tighten patient system. So the key is to follow the directions under the gray bar, and you'll be able to get through these really easy. Pressurizes to 50 centimeters of water pressure. Checks to make sure the expiratory valve is working. And then when it finishes, it will either give you a green check mark or a red X. Green check mark means it passed. Okay. Next one that's right below that is the flow sensor. Each circuit is going to come with this little adapter. It's because during this test, it's going to tell you to turn the flow sensor because it needs to calibrate expiratory flows. So again, key is hit flow sensor, follow directions underneath the gray bar. It says turn flow sensor, means use that adapter, take the flow sensor off, turn it around, and then it'll continue on its own. It says maneuver in progress. So it knows that you've turned the flow sensor around. Just keep watching that gray bar because it's going to eventually tell you to turn it back around so you can calibrate inspiratory flow. So this test is a little longer than the tightness test. Takes about 45 seconds or so.
So you don't have to have a lung attached on
You don't have to have a lung attached to it, nope. So now it says turn flow sensor. You can hear the flow change. So that's another sign that it's ready to be turned. Turn it back around and then it'll finish up. You do have, so if you guys want to play with this, you do have some test lungs that came with each of them, which we're going to use one obviously to train with. So if you're trying to get used to how to set up settings and play with it and get used to what's on here, then you have test lungs to use. Okay. So again, once it's finished, green check mark means it passed. There is an O2 cell calibration here. Only time you need to do the O2 cell calibration if it gives you certain alarms. High oxygen, low oxygen, or calibrate O2 cell. The reason why is because all the O2 cell does is verify that the vent is really giving what you have set. So if I have 50% set and it sees something else, it's like 55 for example, it's going to tell you to calibrate the O2 cell. You can do it while you're ventilating your patient. You don't have to take them off or anything like that. In the case that an O2 cell failed in the middle of a transport, it doesn't mean you have to stop ventilating. It just means you don't have verification that you're really giving what you have set. So watch your SpO2 a little bit closer and then adjust up and down, the FiO2 up and down. It just doesn't have the backup verification that you're giving what you have set. In the case that the vent oxygen delivery broke at the same time as O2 cell, well, your patient's going to desat, and then you're going to need to obviously take them off and bag them. Haven't heard of that happening ever, but just in case, it's just so you understand what the O2 cell is. You can calibrate it while you're ventilating. Okay. So at this point, after you calibrate the circuit, so I don't know if you have circuits, or if you're going to have circuits connected to the vents and ready to go, I can turn this vent off. When I turn it back on, I don't have to do the pre-op check again. Okay, pre-op check is done. Unless I change this circuit, the calibration is good indefinitely.
So if you have a circuit fail, you have to do that whole thing all over again, and with a new circuit. If
you put a new circuit on because the circuit failed for some reason, you would want to run that again. Would it work if you didn't? It would. Is everything going to be as accurate as it possibly could be? It probably isn't going to be because you didn't calibrate it.
Okay.
Still gonna be way better than bagging them.
Yes, it is.
Exactly, and that's why I said, is it going to be exact? It might not be exact. So in that situation, you probably still use the ventilator. Just be aware that if you don't calibrate it, it's going to, the numbers might not be exactly accurate. So now that the circuit setup is complete and we've done our pre-op check, we can put in our patient mode, put in our patient settings, and start ventilation. So you can see the mode we're currently in is up in the upper right-hand corner. So right now we're in PCV, or pressure control ventilation. Okay. What do you use the most when you're out in the field? What mode? Do you use pressure or volume? Volume. So what I'll do is I'll configure this so that it starts up in volume control. Okay. So because we're in pressure and we want volume, we need to change the mode. Modes are right next to the mode name that's up here. If I hit modes, it gives me all my modes. The top two are volume control modes. Okay. So adaptive pressure ventilation is volume control, and then APV SIMV is volume control. So you set a tidal volume, but it has the option for pressure supported breaths also. So I'm not sure if you're used to that on your current vent, where you can set a mode that if the patient triggers, it gives them pressure support. Okay, but that's the difference. It says volume control, and it'll actually tell you what type of mode you're in. So volume control, if I go to APV and I hit confirm, I can see all my settings. Nothing should be too surprising. You set a rate, you set a tidal volume, you set a PEEP. Okay, everyone knows what PEEP is, right? PEEP. You set an I time, you set a flow trigger. That's what the patient has to do to be able to trigger the vent. I would just leave it at 5. It's going to work for the majority of your patients. Only time you would go up on it is probably if you see auto triggering or something like that. If you increase flow trigger or go up on the number, it's going to be harder for the patient to trigger the ventilator. Okay.
If it gives a breath every time you hit a pothole,
Then go up. Exactly. And then the other, and then oxygen FiO2. Okay. In the more tab, you have something called P ramp. It's probably something you're not going to mess with. It's just how fast you get to peak flow. Doesn't change breath timing, doesn't change volume or anything like that. It just changes how fast the volume goes into the lung. So a lower number, it's going to go in faster. A higher number, it's going to go in more distributed through the I time you're setting. So you set an I time, this number is going to make the volume go in quicker during the I time or more throughout the I time. Okay, default's going to work for almost all your patients. But you have that option to change that. Okay. So after I hit modes, I pick my mode, I put my settings in for the mode I'm in, for the mode I want to be in. I hit confirm, and now you can see in the upper right-hand corner the mode changed to the new mode with my new settings. Okay. If I want to change the setting in the mode that I'm currently in, you can see there are 3 main settings that are on the screen. Can't fit everything there. So we have tidal volume, PEEP, and oxygen. Right below those 3 settings, there's a controls button that brings up all the settings for the mode you're in. Okay. Any questions on how to switch the mode? Pretty simple. Hit mode, pick your mode, put your settings in, confirm it, switch your mode. Okay. If I go into APV SIMV, so SIMV, it's going to give allows a pressure supported breath. So if I confirm that, you can see only thing we've added to the volume control settings is a pressure support. So now when the patient triggers a breath, they're going to get a pressure support of whatever you have set. Other modes on the vent, so the next line down is going to be PCV, or pressure control ventilation. Instead of setting a tidal volume, you're setting a pressure control. Okay. Next to that is pressure SIMV. So SIMV, all that means is now you have the availability of a pressure supported breath also that the patient can trigger. Only difference with this pressure support is there's something called pressure sync. Okay, so a lot of places, if I set a pressure of 15, they want their pressure support to match 15. So if P sync is checked, which is a little checkbox, I can't change my pressure support, it's grayed out. If I uncheck it, then they're not synchronized anymore. I can make my pressure support whatever I want. Okay. Spontaneous is going to be is just straight pressure support, fully spontaneous. All patient triggered. So if your patient is not breathing, don't use this one. You'll see that all you're setting is a pressure support, a PEEP, an oxygen, and a flow trigger.
Will it give you an apnea alarm if the patient?
There is, and so when I go to alarms, there's an app. There's actually an apnea time that'll bring your patient into an apnea backup if they go apneic. So in this setting screen that I was going into in pressure support, if I hit apnea, I have the option for backup, which is defaulted to on, and then there's a automatic backup here that's it's volume control. Okay, if you want to put something else, different settings in, you can uncheck automatic and put a rate, a tidal volume, and an I time for backup. Okay. In the alarms, when we go over alarms, there's a time you set that determines when the patient goes into apnea backup. Okay. So that is, again, still in the settings for the mode you're currently in, just the apnea tab. Okay. Next row down, there's ASV. ASV is the one I was telling you about, that you select a percent of normal minute ventilation for your patient. The one thing you have to remember, if you're going to use ASV, see down here, you can select your patient height and gender, put your patient height and gender in. Well, if you're going to use ASV, you have to put that in, because the minute ventilation that it's going to, so the minute ventilation you select is a percentage of their normal minute ventilation. The only way the ventilator knows what their normal minute ventilation is if you put in their height and gender. Okay, so if you are going to use ASV, put in their height and gender. When you have that in, if you see when I go to ASV, you're not setting a pressure control, you're not setting a volume, you are just setting a percentage. 100% is going to give them a minute ventilation that is their normal minute ventilation. The ventilator is going to choose a respiratory rate and a tidal volume based on their pulmonary mechanics. So again, high resistance is going to be lower rates, higher tidal volumes, and lower resistance is going to be, low compliance is going to be lower tidal volumes, higher rates. So kind of mimics what we do in like the ICU environment. Okay. You do still have to set a PEEP and an FiO2, and there is something called a PASV limit. That's just your pressure limit. So one of the alarms is your pressure limit. That's just how high the pressure can go. So you don't have like some kind of runaway pressure because it's trying to ventilate at a certain tidal volume. This will prevent that pressure from going up too high. Okay.
What does that default to?
So it defaults to 30 as a limit, and the alarm is going to be actually 10 above that at 40. Okay. So at 40, when you set a pressure alarm at 40, your limit is going to be at 30. The limit, it still gives a breath. It doesn't take away the I time or anything, but if you can't get to the pressure that it needs to get to, you'll lose tidal volume. Right? But it still gives the full breath. If you actually hit your alarm, it's a pop-off valve. So if your patient starts coughing, for example, my alarm's set at 40 and they hit 40, it's going to cut the breath off. Okay, so to make sure that pressure doesn't keep going up, you don't do damage to the lung.
What does ASV stand for?
Adaptive support ventilation. Okay. So the other thing it does, as the patient does more work, it reduces the support it's giving. So if you've set a minute ventilation, right? And so as the patient starts beating those the target tidal volume and target respiratory rate, it's going to start reducing the control rate and start reducing the pressure to get them back to the targets. The last row is non-invasive and non-invasive ST. Non-invasive is just non-invasive. Set a pressure support, a PEEP, and oxygen. Obviously, this is with a mask. The mask needs to be non-vented. That means there's no exhalation port on the mask. There's no anti-asphyxiation port on the mask. It's literally it's a blue elbow. Everything goes back through the ventilator. If the ventilator were to fail, they'd still be able to breathe. The actual expiratory valve stays open. So it's not like you would be suffocating your patient because there's no anti-asphyxiation valve on these masks. You just have to make sure everything should be going back through the vent, not out of the elbow in the mask. Okay. One thing that they do, the way they manufacture them, the elbow should be a dark blue to be considered non-vented. Okay. So non-invasive, last mode, non-invasive ST, that stands for non-invasive spontaneous time. It means it can be fully spontaneous, or you can set a rate. So if I go in here, now it's not just pressure support, PEEP, and oxygen. I can now set a rate and I time for non-invasive also. Questions on the modes?
So on the ASV,
yeah,
you put in your height and gender.
Right, which gives you ideal body weight.
Right, and then it automatically automatically adjusts the tidal volume
and respiratory rate
and respiratory rate.
based on pulmonary mechanics.
Can you change that?
So you can't change where it's going to adjust the respiratory rate and the tidal volume. But if you want to ventilate them at a higher than their normal minute ventilation, you go up on the percentage. It increases the minute ventilation.
Okay.
So just like you would.
So you can go higher than 100%.
You can go higher than 100%.
Okay.
Yep. So in another mode, in volume control, you would go up on their tidal volume, which increases their minute ventilation, right? So ASV, I go up on their percent of normal minute ventilation, it just increases their minute ventilation.
Alright.
It's just the vent will decide, do I want to increase their minute ventilation by giving more tidal volume, or do I want to increase their minute ventilation by giving more rate? So that's what the ventilator is going to decide based on, does my patient have high resistance or low compliance?
Okay.
So let's just go ahead and do volume control since it's what you are used to using the most. So I'm going to select the APV. It says volume controlled on top. Confirm. I'll put in all my settings, volume, PEEP, rate, high time, and flow trigger. I'll confirm. You can see in the mode is now APV. And now I can start ventilation by hitting the power button. So the power button, if I hit it once, will start ventilation. Or I can hit the start ventilation button there. Okay. Power button, just tap it. If you wanted to turn the vent off in standby, you would hold it for 3 seconds, it would turn the vent off. But if you hit it once real quick, it'll start ventilation. Okay. To get back into standby, this button is the same thing to go into standby. If I hit it once, it says activate standby, and I say yes, and now I'm in standby. So only place I can actually turn the vent off is from standby. I can hold it for 3 seconds, it'll turn the vent off. If I hold it for 3 seconds while it's ventilating, it's not going to do anything but offer the option to go into standby. Okay.
So you have to go into standby before you shut it
You
off.
have to go into standby before you can shut it off. So what you see here now, this is your ventilation screen. Alarms happen in the upper left-hand corner. You can see we have a low minute ventilation alarm. They're silenced for the first 2 minutes because obviously when you put your patient on, you need to make adjustments to your alarm settings. So with all your other settings on the right-hand side, you have alarms. This is where you'll set all your alarms, okay? You can see there are little numbers that you probably can't see because you're far away, but when you're closer, you can see in the middle of the upper and lower selections, there is a number. That number is what your patient is doing. So if I come over here to expiratory minute ventilation, I can see my patient's current expiratory minute ventilation is 4.1. I can see that my low minute ventilation is set at 4. Oops. Set at 4, and my high is set at 10. Pressure limitation is a very important alarm. So pressure limitation, remember I said that if you hit the pressure limitation, it's going to limit the pressure from going up any higher. Okay, so when I hit pressure limitation, it means that my pressure alarm needs to go up to allow the pressure to increase, so that pressure limitation will go away.
So it won't go over whatever alarm you set.
Exactly, it will not go over that, and you will get a pressure limitation alarm. That means you need to go up on your pressure alarm. Okay. So that's the biggest one to remember. It's probably the most. So we have a number on here where you can call to get one of the clinical specialists. It's probably one of the calls I get the most. Is we can't get the tidal volume we want. Well, it's because your pressure alarm has been set too low. You're not allowing the vent to go to a pressure that's high enough to get your tidal volume. So after setting the alarms go away. Like I said, it's silenced for the first 2 minutes to give you that chance to set your alarms. Alarm silence button, so you know, alarm silence is right above the push and turn knob. It'll silence the alarm for 2 minutes. Alarms look like this. So it's gonna make. So alarms happen in the upper left-hand corner. Red is high priority, flashing yellow is medium priority. A solid yellow is actually a low priority. Solid yellow allows you to hit the silence button to acknowledge it. It'll go away. An example of that alarm is when you unplug the ventilator. It'll say it'll tell you it was unplugged. That's the alarm. You would say battery, it's on battery operation, and so you can acknowledge that because you don't need to. I know it's on battery operation because I unplugged it, and it's okay because I have 9 hours of battery life. So, okay. The I up here is related to the alarms, so that's just an alarm log. Okay. Any questions on the alarms at all? No questions? Great. So monitored values, what your patient is doing is on the left-hand side. So you have your peak pressure, your expiratory minute ventilation, your tidal volume, and your rate. If you want to see all the other monitored values that the ventilator can pull up, it's going to be under the monitoring tab on the safe side. 3 pages of monitored values. Most probably aren't going to be very useful for you guys. But there are some, if you want to see what your patient's compliance is, your patient's resistance is, it's in there. You can get, it gives you plateau pressure, auto peeps also in your monitored values. And the reason why I can do that is because of this flow sensor that monitors 200 times a second. So those are all going to be in monitored values. But again, your main monitored parameters, the most important ones, are on the main screen. Okay. Under your tools tab, the tools tab, nothing you guys have to worry about because you're not using low pressure oxygen, right? It's all high pressure. This would give you the option to go to low pressure. One thing you want to make sure is not checked is set oxygen alarm limits manually. The reason why is because you have an O2 cell, so your FiO2 is going to be right where you have it. When you do low flow, it'll give you the option to set alarm limits, but since you're not using low flow, you don't want that box checked. Events, all your events, all the ventilating changes, all the alarms, and when they happen. System is going to give you something called O2 consumption. So it's really small, but after 2 minutes of ventilation, it'll tell you how many liters per minute of oxygen you're using. So if you're using a tank, for example, you can put the liters per minute into your tank equation to determine how long your tank will last. Okay. Also there is, I told you that you could do your O2 cell calibration while you're ventilating. So if I go to my system tab, tests and calibrations, I can do my O2 cell calibration if I'm connected to oxygen. Okay. Next to tests and calibrations is sensors. If you get that case where where the O2 cell fails, for example, so you tried the O2 cell calibration and it didn't pass, then you can go into sensors and uncheck it and turn it off. It'll stop alarming at you. You just need to watch your SpO2. The ventilator's probably not broken. It's still giving your FiO2. You just don't have the verification through the vent anymore. And the last tab is settings, alarm loudness. 5 is generally loud enough. 10 is probably if you're in a helicopter or something or in a really loud environment. Gets very loud. Also there you got day and night, so you can change your screen brightness. And you have date and time for putting your date and time. Any questions on the system tab? Little symbols in the bottom right, just battery indicators, visual battery indicators of how much life is left. And really, that is about it. Buttons on the side here, sorry. So the standby button on top. Do you guys do, so it has the option to run pneumatic nebs through the ventilator. So if you're trying to give one while you're not in the ambulance and maybe on a gurney or something like that, you can hook the oxygen tubing right here. Okay, so at the yellow connector, and there is a button here on the front that looks like a little spray bottle. That's your nebulizer start button. It will run a pneumatic net. Okay. The moon and the sun is a automatic screen brightness adjustment. The lock button is a screen lock. The pair of lungs just gives a manual breath every time you hit it. So each time you hit it, you can hear it's giving a breath to the patient. If you want to hyperventilate them for some reason. Up arrow in O2 is O2 enrichment. 2 minutes of 100% oxygen each time you hit that. The screen, the little printer looking button is for taking screenshots. I'm sure for like educational purposes or something. So you can, there's a USB connector here, put a flash drive in, take screenshots of what's on the screen. And then your alarm silence button those are all the soft keys. And then one last thing you can do, if you touch the graphics, so your pressure waveform on top is always your pressure waveform. The flow waveform down here, I can tap it and I can change it to a volume waveform if I want to. That's it. Questions?
So when you said it kind of has it kept a log of all your alarms
Yep.
and everything,
Can you print it?
is that just for the, from between the 2 times it was on, like when you turn it on until you
So
turn it
that
off?
is for your your patient. If I were to, like, for example, go into standby, turn the ventilator all the way off, I can actually go, when I turn the vent back on, I can hit last patient and it'll pull that information up.
So is it just the last patient or
Just the last
5
patient.
patients ago?
Can't go 5 patients ago.
Okay.
Other questions? I know it probably sounded more complicated going all over all this. Sounds a little, like a lot of information. But you're really using it just like you used your other vent. Go in, select the mode, put your settings in, start ventilation. That's all that there is to this. All those other little things that if you didn't remember those little things, you could still ventilate your patient because you know how to select the mode, how to put your settings in, and how to start ventilation.
This might be more of a question for you and for Oren.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to just so we have tablets that we use to do our patient flow charting on.
Mm-hmm.
When we have a USB cable, can we upload the screenshots we take on that to the tablet like that?
Yeah, if you took screenshots, I mean, you're able to pull. They're just pictures,
Okay.
so
You
pull
can,
them.
but ESO wouldn't recognize them.
Right. So we can upload it though, and then attach it to the chart.
I don't know how you would print it up.
Well, you can
You don't
attach
print
You
it.
would-
the
you take it.
attachment, like how you attach a face sheet.
You just put it,
Okay.
screenshot.
Okay.
Cool.
You would be the first ones that have done that. That's actually kind of, I mean, it saves you from a little bit of charting, I guess. So, USB. So if you did want to do that, again, the USB, there's a cover here. You just put your USB drive here, and then each time you hit that little printer-looking button, it's going to take a screenshot of whatever's on the screen. So you could do that, and then you could upload it, attach it. It's just, I believe, it's a JPEG image.
So, okay, that's a question.
Other questions, guys?
We'll play it.
So really, biggest thing is, take it out, play with it a little bit, get used to where everything is at. It'll just make you faster.
I did have a question. Maybe I misunderstood. You're telling me that it has the ability to deliver a nebulized flow there.
Yeah.
Can that
Because usually
be
those,
done in line with the vent circuit, or is that separate from?
Yeah, so usually you have, there's a T here and it goes in line, and then the nebulizer, pneumatic neb goes in line,
Yeah.
and then you just hook it, the oxygen tubing here, and you run it, while it's on a patient.
But it has to be that circuit or that nebulizer that comes with.
Nope, it's just a normal, it's just I don't know if you have to have different T adapters to put them into
Does
them.
that T adapter have a spring-loaded valve?
It can, yeah,
Is it
yeah.
supposed to, or does it not?
It should, and because then you can actually take the medicine cup off, and then you can
Still
leave
okay.
the T in line,
Yeah.
and obviously you don't have a big leak coming out. So if you have those are what you would use.
Good.
Other questions?
So I had to step out, but where is the nebulizer? Like, you have to turn it on the vent to
So it's
nebulize?
right here. It looks like a little spray bottle. It's right above the alarm silence button. Hit it, turns it on.
Got it.
So one thing to be aware of with that too, you have to be hooked to oxygen to do it. So this is turbine driven, so it's not going to pull flow from the turbine. Just because it's already pretty much working as hard as it's going to work. It will take flow for oxygen or for the nebulizer through your oxygen.
Does it automatically select the flow for the nebulizer? Or can you
So
set
it'll do 8 liters per minute, which is normal for a normal pneumatic neb, which runs off of 6 to 8 liters. The thing is, it compensates. So if you were to T1 in without putting it through the ventilator, you're adding flow, which adds volume, which makes your ventilator alarm. So if you run it through here, it compensates for that flow, so you're not adding that flow in there, and you're not getting the alarms that you would normally get by adding a nebulizer to your circuit. Anything else?
play with it.
Yeah. You want me to, or you?
No, that's the answer.
That's the
how you
answer.
learn it.
It is. If you look for stuff, you'll find it. You're not going to hurt your patient by looking around and finding what you need to find. You're going to hurt your patient by doing something like going up on their tidal volume to a reasonable level. So it's which you would have to confirm that change, right? So you notice you tap, you change, and you confirm by tapping again. So really, just if you're looking for something, just start searching through the menus. You'll be able to find it, and then practice with it.
What's the, you said, put in the gender and.
The height and gender. Yep.
Like, what's the lowest you can, for a baby, that you can put on there?
So if you didn't get neonatal, so you're not going to do neonates on this. It's something you could add in the future if you decided to.
Didn't we decide we were going to have a minimum patient weight that we were
Probably
not
5
going to
kilos.
accept transports on?
I believe it was like 2 or 3 or 4.
So this can go all the way down to 3 kilograms, and you could do 3 kilograms is what you can go down to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sufficient for our needs.
You know, this circuit is rated down to 3 kilograms. That's the minimum you want to go to. Usually in the hospital setting, at 10 kilograms or less is where I switch to a neo circuit. But you know, this is rated to go down to 3 kilograms. And in adult peds, you can go down to 3 kilograms. So, for example, if I were to go all the way down to a 12-inch patient, it's going to be ideal weight, the body weight of 3 kilograms. So once you go below that, you shouldn't be using this circuit anymore, at least. Okay. Other questions?
Did we get that circuit in, or do we have a pediatric circuit with it too?
So this works for adult
So
people.
we don't need to get a smaller one, because we're not gonna go below, we can't go
3
below
kilos.
3, then we don't have to get the smaller.
Right.
So you said anything below 10 is your preference to switch?
It is a preference just because of things like circuit compliance and stuff, but it's
It's
you
not
know,
an, it's your preference. not
it's
a
a
necessity.
preference. It's kind of where, because when you can vent. So at 3 kilograms, this will ventilate them. Could you run into maybe some alarms because or different pressure alarms because the circuit compliance is going to be too high for your patient. You could run into some more alarms, but it will ventilate your patient down to 3 kilograms.
Can you? Oh, sorry.
No.
Can I answer your question?
Yep.
Can you show us a little bit about the pulmonary resistance, because I remember seeing like a 3D diagram and.
Yeah. So.
Can you show a little? So like teach us a little bit about that.
If you guys want to use that, so it is a graphic. So this is just a visual representation of that.
You still have 3 kilograms?
Yep.
That's a big lump for.
For 3 kilograms, yeah. So there we go. Okay. So if I tap the graphic, there is something called the dynamic lung. It's just a visual representation of pulmonary mechanics. So this lung, even though it's rubber, so this lung is a compliance of 13. So has a compliance of about 13 or 14. That would be like in the ICU, that's a really, really sick patient. So normal compliance is 50 or greater. So for example, what would happen in ASV? Low compliance, because the lungs are stiff, we want to ventilate with lower pressures. That's why in the ICU, we ventilate at 6 mils per kilo, really low tidal volumes, but to keep the minute ventilation up, we have to go up on the rate, right? I can't ventilate someone on 6 mils per kilo at a rate of 10. That's not going to be nearly enough minute ventilation for enough CO2 exchange. Okay, so what this picture is showing, see how the lungs are boxy looking? That's just showing you that the compliance is really low. And I could also see in this screen that my compliance is 21, which is very low. So I can increase compliance, and you'll see the lungs are going to change. So it's an 8 breath average. So you see they're boxy right now. They'll go into a normal looking lung because I'm increasing compliance by helping this lung take a breath. And so what you'll see is
Yeah.
the changing of the shape of the lung to a more normal shape. Okay, like that. So the other thing this dynamic lung will show, so we have resistance. Resistance is 4, normal resistance is less than 10. 10 to 20 is moderate airway resistance, and above 20 is going to be severe airway resistance. So that's going to be like your severe asthmatics.
Can you say those numbers again?
Yeah, so normal resistance is less than 10.
Okay.
Moderate airway resistance is 10 to 20.
What
And
about
then
20 is
severe is 10 to 20. Sometimes, and so what you'll see. So what you'll see in the lung, what changes, and what will change is the bronchial tree. So the bronchial tree, when resistance increases, will turn from pink to pink with gray under it to just a red line through the bronchial tree. So this is an 8-breath average, so we'll be there in a sec. So I'm at a resistance of 37. This is like your severe asthmatic that should probably be getting albuterol just running kind of constantly. So what you'll see is the bronchial tree now has that red line. So if it looked normal at first and then you see it turn into this, there's other things that can increase resistance, like obviously secretions can increase resistance. If the tube is kinked, you'll see an increase in resistance. So if you're using this as a graphic, it just helps you catch those things a little bit faster. Okay. And so if we were using ASV, so that adaptive support ventilation, what you would see in this case where the resistance is high is, so in your case, you guys would probably just still use the same time volume, right? Same rate, or would you guys normally make changes if it was asthmatic?
I think our IE ratio would change.
Yeah, you would want
So our
longer expiratory time.
Yeah.
Shorter I times, longer expiratory times. So lower rates will obviously make it so you can give even more expiratory time. So instead of you having to figure that out, the ventilator sees that low resistance and will make that change automatically. And so that's another nice thing is maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know their resistance is high, or you don't know that their compliance is low. And so, especially with your low compliance patients, so patients who are developing ARDS, that we're trying to keep at low, that we would normally, like they come into the hospital, we're going to put them on 6 mils per kilo, low tidal volumes. This will see that low compliance and automatically ventilate them at a lower tidal volume and a higher respiratory rate to help prevent that having high pressures and doing any kind of ventilator-associated lung injury. So it's something to look at and play around with. It's one thing you can use it. If you decide not to, you can just use your volume control like you're used to.
So
What's that? Go ahead.
yeah, so your peak pressure
Pressure alarm.
alarm.
Yep.
That's that top reading there.
So that's your peak pressure. So that's the pressure you're actually giving. So not your alarm. So in your alarms.
What I'm curious is, like, usually what I'm used to seeing is my peak inspiratory pressure in my hips.
Yeah.
How is that? And this, are they the same?
Peak pressure is the same. Yeah.
It's just the same.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you do a peak flat on this? No.
You can. So it's if there's a plateau pressure, it's going to be in monitoring. If there's enough time monitoring plateau pressure, it'll give it to you. Otherwise, it's a calculation. So there's an equation for it, and I can send that to Adam if you want to know that.
There's no button that push and hold.
There's a button that you can hold it, but the thing is, it's not as accurate as it should be, just because it's the way the
measures it all the time.
the way the pneumatic, so it tries to measure it all the time. Yes.
So why isn't it measuring it right now then?
So
Don't answer hard questions, Orion.
You started it.
right there's so much that goes. So it would rather not report one than report inaccurate one. So it's not reading them right now. Could be certain rates. Maybe there's a little turbulent airflow. There are things that will make it so it can't read.
Can we ever send you pictures of the vent so we can do this?
I'd love to.
It's like this stuff.
So again, the equation, it's a simple equation that I'll send to Adam if you look at that, which is good. I'm glad you're looking at plateau pressure because a lot of people don't care about plateau pressure, just because, you know, obviously plateau pressure is the pressure at it's in your small airways. So peak pressure is the pressure of the whole system. There's a lot of stuff that can change peak pressure. But when you do that breath hold, you get that, it equalizes everything out, so you know what pressure is actually getting to your small airways, which if we're in an ICU, again, we're trying to keep that pressure at less than 30.
So you said you could do that.
You can do a breath hold. So the lung here, if I hold it, there's my breath hold. And so what I can do...
Will that give you a P-plat there then?
So you can measure it. So if I hold it, there's a button here that freezes waveforms. See that orange button? I froze my waveform. I can scroll back,
And see the pressure.
and then I can see the pressure is 32.
So if you go to monitoring now, will that show you the P-plot?
Okay.
Yeah.
You go into monitoring.
No, it's not gonna.
it
It's
still
not,
won't
it's not
show you
gonna
that.
report. It's not gonna report it there. So
Well, what the heck?
yeah, I know. I get it. It's generally it's a pause issue or something. I'd have to look it up in the manual to be honest. So
Are those the manuals right over there?
yep.
Okay, cool.
And if you want an electronic one, I can send you an electronic one.
Do they have audiobooks?
What is it? A PDF, like a searchable file that you
Yep.
type in? And,
Yeah, so I have it. I have it in my iBooks on my phone, and I
Yeah,
can
that'd be
search for
awesome.
stuff. I'll send that to you guys then.
We should get them to come out with an audiobook with a nice soothing voice.
Yeah.
So it would put me to sleep faster.
Welcome to Hamilton Medical.
Well, wait till you watch
You
it.
should read it.
So there are training modules online. So I don't know if anyone decided to explore that, but that voice is like a robotic monotone lady voice. It's just like horrible.
I believe you sent those to me, right?
I sent those to you.
And then I forwarded them to you.
So I sent a video. So I sent a link to a video, and I sent a quick guide that you can have on your phones or something like that. And then also I sent a link to the training videos. I don't know if you guys need continuing education credits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there are continuing education credits with it. If you watch it, it is much more boring than I am. So just so you know.
So when those first came in, that front little plate under the screen would come off.
Yeah.
Is
So
that
you,
supposed to
Change
Yeah.
your
That's the
battery.
battery.
it's batteries.
Okay.
So batteries, one is swappable. Again, one is not. So the one that's covered is not. So
Do we have a charger?
you do have one. You have one charger. It's a calibrator. It's also calibrated too. So they should be calibrated once a year.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys have Hamilton servicing these or
We do, yeah.
you service them.
Or Hamilton will service them
Hamilton
for us.
does. So when Hamilton
I
comes,
think, I'm not sure if we've decided quite yet what we're doing with that, but I think that was going to end up being a plan because our other option was to have
someone goes down to
Yeah.
Reno and train for
someone
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was going to be kind of a headache just because of road trip stuff.
Yeah, it's usually easier just to have us do it, have our service department do it.
Yeah. So those battery chargers need to be calibrated once a year then?
So the batteries get calibrated each year during
Okay.
because they're supposed to be serviced every year,
Yeah.
and so these get calibrated each year just to extend the life of them. Is why it does it. So the battery charger is actually a battery calibrator. So since you don't have to calibrate them, and you were gonna do a if you did preventative maintenance with us, then you wouldn't use that actual charger. You would just charge them in here. And if you came into a situation where maybe one of them was charged and one of them had discharged or something, pull a charged battery out of the other one, put it in that one you want to use. Or for example, just be aware one's changeable. And I think you missed 9 hours of battery life at 80%.
Oh,
So if you have a transport longer than that, I'm sorry. It's a long transport.
Well, that's what that cable there is for too. You can just plug it into the internet.
Exactly. So you shouldn't have any battery issues or anything like that.
Adam, you sent me the quick easy guide, and all those are the training modules.
Okay.
If you send me those, I'll put them in the training that's coming up next week. Everybody can just sign that they attended the training and do those modules and it's done.
Okay.
Is that pretty much it for today?
I believe so.
Yeah, that's it. There's nothing else to really tell you about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben.